Good evening. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Happy Thursday. We are back. Jump on when you come in. Like, tag, and share. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Happy Thursday. Good evening, everyone. Happy Thursday. As you are coming in, I want you to go ahead and like, tag, and share. We are on live again, second time this week. Good evening. Happy Thursday, everyone. Go ahead and share this. I'm going to get started in just one moment. Super excited to be back on again. Good evening, everyone. We are back on live tonight. Happy Thursday. Hope everyone has had a great day so far. Super excited to be on tonight again. Second time this week. Good evening. When you come in, like, tag, share. Let me know that you are on and you can hear me okay. Good evening, everyone. All right. I am so very excited to be on tonight. We are back again with another podcast, with another chat tonight with a special guest. As you know, if you do not know, October is Domestic Violence Awareness. And so our last two episodes or podcasts, we have been talking about domestic violence. And so we are back again with another guest talking about domestic violence. So if you jump on, anytime you jump on tonight, go ahead and like, tag, share, comment. Let us know that you are on. I am super excited to have another special guest on with me tonight. She is an author. She is an educator. She is a domestic violence survivor. And so I am excited tonight to have with me Dr. Reese Hargraves. Good evening.
Hello, everybody. Hello.
Good evening. So excited to have you on with me on tonight to talk about this very important topic of domestic violence awareness, and not so much just domestic violence, but also the journey of hope and the journey of healing and going through a divorce and what it looks like to embrace second chances. So I'm just going to turn the floor over to you to tell us a little bit about your story with domestic violence.
Okay. Thank you, Kia. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to start with my story. I grew up in the church. My parents were saved. They raised us in church. We had a pretty good church family. And when I had real good daddy. And so when my mother died when I was 17, and he wanted me to go see the world. And so I went into the Air Force. And I believe every girl searches for if she has a good daddy, she searches for a man like her daddy. And when I didn't want to get saved when I was young. I wanted to go and I wanted to have some fun. So when I went in the Air Force, I went to have fun. And I partied. I did what I wanted to do. I loved the independence. Um, After some unfortunate circumstances, I it turned my eyes towards God, and I got saved when I was in Korea, and but I failed, and I ended up being pregnant, and I ended up marrying my first husband, and we had only known each other 6 months. And I was scared to raise a baby by myself, and the baby wasn't his. He knew it, but he still wanted to marry me anyway, and so I did. Um, and He ended up being stationed in South Dakota. I went and we started our marriage there in South Dakota. We were in church. We were starting out just really, really good. I was pregnant the first time he pushed me. I was about 3 months pregnant. And I was thinking, I said, who would push the pregnant woman? And things, we began life together. I had a baby. We became active in church. By the time I went to my 6 month checkup, my 6 week checkup, I was pregnant again. So things started rolling really, really fast. And the violence didn't start until we were in pretty good. I think that other than the first push, that was it after my baby was born, the first baby was born, when he was about 3 months old, he choked me. My husband choked me. I can't remember why he choked me, but he choked me. And I left with the baby and I went to stay with some friend's house. And something happened. Her husband ended up coming into my room. So I knew I didn't sleep at all that night. And that made me go back home. I went back home. He was sorry. And we continued life. The abusive episodes were really sporadic. So I had the second baby. And my mother had passed. So my brother came out to South Dakota to live with us. And because my daddy needs some help. So he needed to get through school. And my daddy couldn't really be that kind of dad to push him through school. And so we were really excited to have my brother with me. However, one evening, I had got out of the Air Force and I was working a graveyard shift at a convenience store. So I would work all night and keep the babies during the day. And I just wasn't a good idea. But I was really, really tired one night, and my husband came and started messing with me. And I was so tired. I said, stop. And that just set him off. And my brother heard the commotion and came and tried to help me. And he ended up being punched in the eye. It started bleeding here. I got hit here, and we called 911 and got taken to the emergency room. From that point, that caused the military police to get involved, and they came and picked him up. After we came back home, they came and picked him up, and he had to go through counseling, some light stuff. I ended up sending my brother back home, and we continued life. And the abusive episodes continued very sporadically, but they were still there. And it made me really not free to say what I wanted to say. I had to walk on eggshells because I never knew what would set them off. And mind you, we were in the church. We were active in the church. We taught Sunday school together. And because when I came to South Dakota, I was pregnant, so I had the secret. I did not really befriend anybody. I have always been very shy. And so he was very outgoing. So a lot of times after church, I'll go sit in the car and he would socialize, and then he would come and we would go home. I didn't befriend a whole lot because I had this secret. And then I had another secret that he was violent. And he became a licensed minister. Our pastor never knew about the things that were going on at home. And I never wanted to tell because I could see God using him. So I didn't want to mess up the ministry aspect of that. And so we spent 2 years in South Dakota. with those episodes of violence. And then he got stationed in Alaska. And I came home, which was a remote tour. So I came home to Virginia, and me and the boys stayed here while he was gone for a year, a great blessed year. um, so that was good. It was good. I was independent. We talked on the phone. Everything was great. We was getting along over the phone. Couldn't wait to get back together. When he came back home, we had planned to have another baby, and I got pregnant right away. And the most memorable episode of abuse was one night. I don't know what set it off. I can never remember what set it off, because whatever set it off was so minor in comparison to the event. He took me by my feet and he dragged me from the corner of my bed. I had ran to the corner of the bed. He dragged me from the bed to the floor, causing me to hit the floor. And he dragged me from the bedroom. And as he was dragging me, I reached hold of a vacuum cleaner. He took the vacuum cleaner, started beating me with the vacuum cleaner. I could see my boys, they were 2 and 3 years old. I could see them sitting on the couch and just watching. And I was wondering, so what are they thinking? That was the worst. I think that was the worst episode. But the next day we were supposed to go to hear the baby's heartbeat. And when we got there, we could not hear a heartbeat. And the doctor said, sometimes this thing just happened. I was very sore from the beating, but I was never bruised. He said, sometimes this thing just happens and the baby would expel itself naturally. But when we got back home, I started cramping, and my husband, he was distraught. He was so upset. For the first time, he told somebody. He called our pastor in South Dakota, and he said, I beat my wife. The baby, we couldn't hear a heartbeat. The pastor said, you killed your baby? My husband was tore up. And that started, and he was very sorrowful. I laid on the bed for the next few days, miscarrying this baby. And that was the most traumatic event, I think, of our whole 12 years of marriage. And so I ended up getting pregnant again. He didn't touch me at all that whole 9 months. I guess the fear of that last, he didn't bother me. There was no balance. So I had the baby. There were times when God was just so gracious to me. I can't tell you how many times I was choked. It was quite a few times. But the amazing time is I was working for a church. And one day, and the kids used to go with me to the daycare there. And I know one time I was driving home, and we had to drive home over the James River Bridge. And I remember I was prompted to pray in the spirit. And so I did it all the way home. And when I got home, he grabbed me, and I was on the floor, and he was choking me. And I don't know what made him let go, because you know what choking, I couldn't breathe, but something made him let go. And I was thinking, I said, God, you're such a good God. I was thinking that he had prepped me for this, and that prayer across that bridge saved my life. I used to, so that started me I really just started to just spend one time with God. I always had a prayer area in my life, a prayer area in my house where I would go to pray, and I would journal my prayers, and I would just spend that real good time with God. My husband found my journal one day, and he read my journal, and I never hid it, never thought it was a big deal, because I just thought out of respect, nobody would just touch my journal. He read it, and he saw all the prayers that I was praying for him. He marked up my journal and told me to pray for myself. That's when I started turning my prayers inward instead of outward. Because you can pray for somebody all day long, but if they don't have the desire to change, they're not going to change. So what you got to do, you got to pray for yourself. And so I began to get so close to God, so close to God. And I knew. Now, let me tell you, it's funny how when you're going through abuse, you're okay as long as nobody else knows. You're okay. I was okay because the kids didn't really see any of it. Just that one incident with the vacuum cleaner, the boys saw it, but they never saw anything else. They may have heard arguing, but they never saw the events. And one day, my son had did something very bad in school, and when he came home, my husband, they got whippings before, it was no big deal, but my husband began beating this boy, and the boy fell on his back, and my husband kept beating him with the belt, and he bruised his shoulder really bad. It was an open cut to bruise, and the only way I could get him to stop was to land on him. And when I did, he stopped. But he told me, "You better not coddle him. You better not coddle him. Get out. You better not coddle him." And so I did. But that made me brave for my kids. And I told him, and the next day I said, "If you ever do that again, I'm gonna call the police, and the school would have the evidence because they would see the bruises." And he would that scared him enough. But it's funny. I was okay as long as it was just impacting me. But when you love your kids, there's no greater love than a mother's love for her child. So when you see that's happening to your child, something rise up in you that I didn't have for myself. And so as I spent time with God, I began to see myself as I saw my son. And I began to see that I am a daughter of the king. And if I'm a daughter of a king, then I'm a princess. And I deserve to be valued. I'm precious. And that's spending time with God just daily, spending time with just enabled me to gain a new strength. So there was an episode that happened in an apartment that we had. He wanted me to co-sign for a car, and he could not keep a stable job. He had gotten out of the Air Force, could not keep a stable job. And I knew that getting the car was not a good idea because I was doing home daycare at that time. And he threw me around the kitchen and all of that. I called 911, and that I got a restraining order, and that we stayed separated for months while he went through counseling or whatever. We got back together. Now, while we were separated, I was still in church in Newport News. And my pastor was teaching a series on boundaries, a Bible study on boundaries. I would never forget it. And talking about how we need to set boundaries. And he really worked that for Tuesday nights. He would teach that thing while we were separated. That gave me more strength. Now, my pastor and my assistant pastor, they knew what was going on, but they knew that I wanted my marriage to work. And so they ministered to us. Separately. Anytime there was an incident, I could call the assistant pastor and he would talk my husband down or out. The last day we were separated, got back together, violence free for 2 years. And then one day I came home. He had gotten a job as a manager of a car wash, but he had to wash cars, and it was a very hot day. I wasn't even in the house 5 minutes. He started cussing, and then I reached for the phone. I called the assistant pastor. That he cussed at the assistant pastor. He took that. He was on the other side of the room. He took that phone and he threw it, and it hit my chest, and it bounced on the window and broke the window. Now, before that incident, I felt like I was such a God's daughter, that I felt like that if he would have ever hit me again, that either his arm would fall off or he would drop down and die. I know it was crazy, but I had that belief that would happen. That's why I kind of think God spared him by having him be on the other side of the room. But when he did that, he screamed at me to get out. I had the kids come. We got in the car and we drove. We didn't come back to live until he was gone from that house and went back to home to live in Baltimore. And that's when the official separation and divorce occurred. And so you call me a survivor. I ain't no survivor. I'm an overcomer. I look at myself as a survivor. That means I just made it through. I didn't make it through. I overcame that thing, because everything that was torn down in me, I saw myself as having a purpose, and I saw God's purpose in me, and I began to walk in that purpose that he had for me. And so when you start walking in that purpose that God had for you, you don't just survive, you overcome. because God said he make us more than more than overcomers. So that's my story.
It's just so interesting to me, and me and you talked about this, on the phone about, the monster within, right? And it's just so I can't even think of the word. I want to say devastating. That's like the word that's coming to my mind, to hear that he was a licensed minister. You guys were in the church. You guys were working in the ministry, but he had this other life, almost to
Yeah.
say. Like he had this other side that, you know, preaching and teaching, and like you said, like, ministry, and you're seeing God use him, but at home he's a totally different person. He's choking you, he's, dragging you across the floor, he's hitting you, all of those things. How did you deal with that dynamic? Oftentimes, I don't know if people realize that, violence happens even with people that are in the church. And you said it a couple of times that you kind of learned to mask it. You didn't tell people, what was going on in your home. You still were faithful. You still were in the church. You guys were teaching Sunday school. You were serving together in the ministry, but you kind of had, I mean, not kind of, you had another life at home. Like, how did you deal with that dynamic of, man, we're in church, we're in ministry, but my husband is also another person that people on the outside are not seeing?
Well, church was a safe place too. So we served in church together. This in church, he was a completely different man. And I saw God use him. I saw how he ministered. Um, we had couples over, and those were safe times. He would minister finances. He would minister. I mean, we had a good marriage on the outside. We were a young couple ministering to other young couples, but when he turned into that monster, he didn't even look the same. He was a completely different man, and it just wasn't the same. He just wasn't the same, and I guess that. So I lived hoping to not let that monster come out. And I lived even when he was in those moods. Sometimes he would stay mad for weeks and would not talk to me. And so I would live just hoping, just trying to make him come back, his real self come back, the nice guy come back. So that's how I live. You just live just hoping that hey, the monster would stay away. And
Mm-hmm.
because outside of that, we had a good marriage. He was a good
Right.
father and he was a good minister. But it's just those times when that monster appeared. And it wasn't often.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
often, but it was enough that, hey, we had some really,
Right.
really rough times. Yeah.
Right. Right. Did you ever I mean, blame, or did you ever say, like, maybe if I do this or that better? Because I know I've talked to women who've, gone through divorce, and sometimes they have that, maybe if I change, it'll make the person change, it'll make the person be better. Did you ever go through those periods of time where you blamed yourself, or, felt, had that
Kia,
shame, or like, maybe I can do something to make him stop behaving this way?
let me tell you, with every episode, I never felt like I did something to provoke the episode, but I felt like I deserved it because of
Wow.
the things I had done prior to giving my life to Christ, prior
Wow.
to living right. I
Hmm.
felt like I deserved this is the choice I made. I made the choice to marry him because I was afraid to have this baby, this another man's baby by myself. So I felt like I deserved all of that. Not that I caused the episodes. I could never
Mm.
just I was like, what in the world did I do? I couldn't figure out. I asked him, what I do? But I felt like I deserved it because of the choices I had made. And I felt like, since,
Right.
hey, I made the choice of marrying him, that was my choice. I'm stuck. That's how I
Hmm.
felt.
Wow. Wow. So was that period of time where you, I guess at that period, not understanding your value or self-worth, or you felt as though I'm in this abusive marriage maybe because I'm being punished for bad mistakes that I made? It was a mistake in me marrying him, and so now this abuse is a result. Is that what you're
Yeah.
saying?
Is a result of the choices that I made. I put
Hmm.
myself in this.
Hmm.
That's how I
Mm.
felt. So I felt like I was stuck in this because this was my choice. And
Wow. Yeah.
yeah,
Wow.
and I didn't have a whole lot of self-confidence because of I just lived with secrets. I was pregnant. I couldn't even tell my family that I was pregnant before I got married. Who does that? Um,
Right.
I was just living with so
Wow.
much self-condemnation that I did not
Mm.
feel that I was worthy of anything greater than what I chose.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you think, in your experience, and I know you've, as an overcomer, you've been able to talk to other women and you've been able to share your story of hope. You've written a book in regards to this. How what do you tell women, or why do you feel like there are some women that do stay? I know on my previous podcast, we talked a little bit about generations, right? That sometimes older women who have gone through abusive marriages, they kind of felt as though they feel as though, this is the person I married, death do us part. Eventually, like you said, eventually this person is going to change. Even if they abuse me for 5 years, 10 years, if I just hang on in there, if I just stay in there, what would you say to that? Was that a part of your thinking that, I made these marriage vows, this is the worst, right? If I just stay in this situation, then hopefully we'll get to the better part.
I kept holding on to the hope because when there weren't violent times, things were really good. He coached the kids' soccer game. He coached the basketball team. We went to church together. We served in church together. I kept holding on to the hope that that would be the permanent thing. That would be the thing that would, and you expect God to
Yeah.
to fix it. God, I got in this mess. Fix this thing. So,
Right.
yeah, yeah,
Right. So, the last incident, and he said to get out, and that for you, it was kind of like your release, and you made a decision to go, you got a divorce. How did you begin that process of healing? So not only, you were in this marriage for 12 years, you know, abuse on and off, how did you start the process to heal?
well, when I was told to get out, I had 4 children. I was, and that's a lot. And the 3 of them
Hmm.
were boys, and
Hmm.
we went to stay with my daughter's godmother, her family. They let us stay for as long as we needed to until we could go back home. And when I went back home, I had nothing. The power was turned off. He had taken the deposits from the electric companies, and went and the car that we had purchased that against my will got repossessed. My credit was shot. The rent was behind. I had a lot to I had a lot to overcome,
Right.
and the church was my support system. The church helped me a whole lot.
Hmm.
The pastor knew about those little incidences, and it didn't fix itself. My marriage didn't fix itself, but they were there to carry me through after I was there left alone. And that was my greatest support. I worked for the church, so that
Hmm.
was a great support for me.
Hmm.
And I just began to just fix my life. I believe, pull things together, got my credit fixed by a credit company that enabled me to just make payments. They worked out that payment. I think they still exist. They work out
Mhm.
payment plans for you, and the church helped me with things that are behind and utilities, and then my dad ended up coming in to stay with me, and he helped me raise the boys. So it was the support system that helped me to pull my life back together.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even though I know this episode is called "I Am Not My Divorce." Divorce. One thing that I did was I had a yard sale. I had a yard sale, and in that yard sale, I took all of his things and I had it for sale. That was the one. That was a very sad day because I felt
Mm.
like it was the death. You know,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
you would think after all you've been through, this is a sad thing. You've been set free. Yes, I felt like I was that he had died, and I was selling all his things, and it was a very depressing day to just be that my life like I wanted, the life that I wanted is over. And now what
Mhm.
do I do
Mhm.
now? I'm single with these 4 kids. What do I do now?
Mhm.
So that was healing in itself. The grief from that, I had to
Yeah.
heal from it. But I can tell you, when I wrote COVID, I
Mhm.
had already started writing my story, and um, during COVID, when we couldn't do anything, and when I was still spending, because I've had this habit of spending time with God, because God let me know that He's my daddy, and I need to spend time with Him so I can get to know my daddy. But during the
Right.
pandemic, I started. I would. God let me know, hey, you write what I tell you to write, and so I put set aside what I was working on, and I wrote this. I began to study the Word, and I think now that was 20 years later. I'm
Mm.
remarried,
Yes.
and in a beautiful marriage, and I can tell you that is when I was truly healed from the inner
Wow.
core, when God walked me through His scriptures. And over that period of time of the pandemic,
Right.
he walked me through those scriptures, and my life, I began to line my life up with his stories in the scripture. And that's how COVID came about, is God's story aligned with my life. And it enabled me to see things completely different.
Mhm.
I really became an overcomer. I can say before then I was a survivor, but
Right.
now when I saw
Mhm.
my life in comparison to God's story, how even the women with the issue of, I talk about the woman with the issue of blood, that she suffered for 12 years. I suffered for 12 years. Even
Right. Right.
God, I said, look at how you just all the Lord is my shepherd. I talk about David and everything,
Right.
and how he kept me. He sustained me through those 12 years, and then he set me free.
Right.
Either I knew
Right.
that God would either change after we were separated, when we got back together, and when I told him that if he ever hit me again, it would be over. Um, that
Mhm.
that 2 year span when we were violence free, I knew that God would either change him or deliver me from it.
Mhm.
And it looked like in that 2 year period that he had changed. I thought we were
Mhm.
going to be okay until that get out episode. And
Right.
that was when God delivered me from that.
Mhm. Right. I mean, I definitely understand and resonate with what you were saying when you talked about the yard sale, right? And it's like a death. And I think if you've never gone through a divorce, you don't understand how those feelings can walk parallel with each other. Like you can know this was the right decision. Like I was supposed to leave this situation, but there is also a grief that comes um from that, because no person I know gets married and says, I'm going to also get divorced. Like that I just don't know anybody that ever says, I'm going to get married, but I hope I get divorced too. Like you have this idea of what your marriage is going to be like. You have this idea of what it's going to be like to live your life with the person that you have chosen, or you chose each other, as husband and wife, and then to have all of these things play out and then the marriage dissolves. It is a death. and you do grieve and you do go through the grieving process. And so I don't think people understand, like you said, that those things can definitely coexist. Like, it was a sad day for you. It was the ending. It was the selling, because once you sell it and get rid of it, it's permanent. It's That's it. You can't sell it and then say, "Oh, wait a minute, let me have it back." That's the end. But then also, like you just said, understanding that God also delivered you, from that situation. And so that within itself requires healing, of trying to make sense of those two emotions being together at the same time. You know what I'm saying? Like, having that sadness because the life that I thought I was going to have, I didn't have, I'm not going to have. But also, I'm relieved because this toxic environment, or this unhealthy situation that I'm in, this abuse that I'm in, is over, especially because you had kids too as well. Was that a part of your being, I'm using the word okay very loosely, being content in you leaving because you did have children and maybe not wanting them to be a witness?
That's a great question. Let me tell you what meant a whole lot to me. Every woman, every mother, every saved mother want their children to be saved one day and live a right kind of life. And one thing that was very important to me, I did not want them to grow up in church and see somebody wearing the Christian hat and not living it. So I didn't want them to see, what I saw. And I was okay as long as they didn't see it. As long as they could see the Christian side of our life, I was okay. But when they had to see the monster that I was seeing, that I didn't want them to be confused with that. And I felt like that if they saw that, they would never want salvation or understand what salvation was. Right. And so that meant more to me. And that last episode, when he told me to get out, he was cussing and everything. And that wasn't something that they were used to hearing. And that, so when he said get out, I was like, yes.
Right.
Let's go.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's such a valid point, like you said earlier, that you were okay as long as your children weren't being witness to it. You could, as the mom, you're like, I'm taking, this is on me. This is on me. These beatings, the verbal abuse, the emotional abuse, the physical abuse. But it's another situation, like you said, when your children are then seeing it too, because they're too young to process. No matter how much we think we're shielding them, or there's still residual that comes from that. And I've heard some women that have been in toxic relationships say, "Oh, where God shielded me," whatever that means, but what about your kids? Like you said, this man was a minister. Like, he was in the church. He held a title in the church. He worked in the church. And then for him to then behave a totally separate way, I can definitely imagine how, as a child, that would be so difficult to process. And then it almost makes it as though, if the dad is the aggressor, if my mom is the aggressor, it's a joke, because you're living one way at church, but then you're living another way at home. And it can taint the purity and the sanctity of our relationship with God.
That's right.
Yeah. So you're married, you got married again, in a great marriage now. How did you, or what did you do to get to the point that you felt like, I can receive love again? Like, I'm open to receive love again. I'm open because, there are a lot of people who have gone through, marriages where it was a toxic environment. There was maybe some level of abuse, whether it was emotional or physical or mental or verbal, whatever it is, and you go through that kind of maybe having a wall up or maybe being fearful. Can I trust a new person? Can I trust myself? Like, how did you get to the point where you felt like, okay, I'm open to receive love. I'm ready. I'm ready to trust someone else with my heart, etc.
Yeah. Well, that's the unique part about my next book. My
Mm-hmm.
next book tells that side of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And my daddy, I told you my daddy moved in with me after
Mm-hmm.
I divorced.
Mm-hmm.
And he had this, he worked at the shipyard and he met this. Now I'm a daddy's girl. I love
Mm-hmm.
my daddy. My daddy loves me. My daddy was always just the best daddy ever. And I told you I left.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to marry a man like my daddy. And my
Mm-hmm.
first husband kind of looked like him. He was light skinned like him. So I felt like that was, and I was so far off. I was so
Right.
far off. And
Right.
but my daddy, he said, hey, I got this guy I want you to meet. And he had
Mm-hmm.
told me that one time before, years ago when I first went in the military. He had told me, I got this guy I want you to meet. When I was in Wyoming, and he
Mm-hmm.
sent me his address and I wrote him and he never wrote back.
Mm-hmm.
Well, after I was separated and divorced, he told
Mm-hmm.
me, hey, I got this guy I want you to meet. And so it happened to be the same guy that he wanted me to meet
Wow.
years and years ago. Now,
Wow.
I trust my daddy 100%. I
Mm-hmm.
trust him 100%. So when your daddy got a man for you,
Right.
I mean, it don't get any better than that. And so when I
Right.
met this gentleman, I
Mm-hmm.
just and we talked via email first for a long
Mm-hmm.
time. Then we started talking on the phone for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So I was safe even in just his voice, even
Wow.
in his letters. It was safety there. He was gentle. He was like my daddy. He didn't look
Mm-hmm.
anything like my daddy, but his spirit was like my daddy. And don't be fooled by what you see. We always as women, we looking for, hey, what he look like? How do he look?
Right.
Well, well, this one I met through email and through phone. And before we at our first date, when we decided to, hey, let's meet up at a restaurant in person, I was already in love with him. Just
Wow.
because of just his voice and how he talked and just his care that came through the phone. And then my daddy introduced. So I was safe because this
Mm-hmm.
is what my daddy wanted. And naturally, that's what my daddy wanted for me. But spiritually, God got that man for you. And
Yes.
that God had this man for me years before I started acting a fool and doing and having my fun. He already had him for me, except I went my
Wow.
own way. And so
Wow.
that's
Yes.
how I got this man. This is the man that my daddy had for me and my
Mm-hmm.
my heavenly father had for me. And we've been
Right.
married for 22 years, happily
Wow.
married for 22 years.
Yes. What a powerful like analogy, and to say yes, this is somebody that your natural father had for you, but also it just reiterates the point that God has someone for you, even if you've gone through a divorce, even if you've been in traumatic situations, relationships where there was abuse or whatever, because you go through that period of time where you feel like, who's going to want me, right? After I've been divorced, if you have children, you have 4 children, I have 2 children, those thoughts come to your mind, right? Like, who's going to want me? I already have children, I've
Yeah.
been divorced. But what a great revelation and a surety to know that our heavenly father, right? Maybe even if your natural father doesn't have anybody or is not picking somebody,
Yeah.
is not out here picking people for you, but our heavenly father knows the person that he has for us, and he knows God is the only one that can bind. The scripture talks about how he bottles up our tears and how he binds up our wounds. And so when we fully trust in the fact that God has the right person, the purposed person for us, then things happen the way that they're supposed to happen. I mean, that's such reassurance to know that, to know and be okay with, I can trust this person again because it's who my Heavenly Father sent. I think that makes a difference, right?
Yeah, yeah. And that's God's grace. I mean, we
Yeah.
can go out here and we can do some of the foolish things. We can search for things and just have babies and do this and this and sin and fall. But when we turn our eyes to God, his grace is just so much more so sufficient for us. And
Right.
he still, when we turn away from our foolish way, those promises he has are for us.
Right.
That's his grace. And he had them for me the whole time. It's just that I was stuck thinking that I deserved what I was getting because of all the sin that I did before. But God isn't like that.
Wow.
So we have to
Right.
forgive ourselves. God forgives
Right.
us, but we have to forgive ourselves. I had to forgive myself to where, hey, I did this. I did wrong. I don't deserve this. Forgive
Right.
yourself. You don't deserve
Right.
this. You deserve better. You are valuable. You are God's child. You deserve to be treated. All that he has is yours. So
Right.
turn from that. Forgive yourself and come on, girl. Come on, sister.
Right. Right. I mean, that is definitely what people need to hear, right? That God does not hold us to our past mistakes. I mean, that's a lesson that I had to learn. You know, it's one thing, like you said, you grew up in the church, I grew up in the church. It's one thing to talk about grace, right? But it's another thing to actually receive the grace of God. Those are two different things. It's two different things to just talk about it and, oh, God give me grace. But to actually receive God's grace and to know that God is my father.
That's right.
And what does a good father do? A good father protects, a good
That's
father
right.
provides, a good
That's
father depends, is dependable. Like he defends you. You can
that's right.
always go to your father. And so when we let go of this self-condemnation, because I had to do that, right? I had to let go and say, God forgives me for all of the mistakes that I made, all of the mistakes I made when I was younger, all of the whatever I have done that I feel like I was less than. And so I think that's a real true statement to realize that when you have God's grace, when you have God's forgiveness, and when you have God's love, then God is the one that
Yes.
calls us worthy, right? God is the
That's right.
one that tells us that we are loved and that we are
That's right.
forgiven. And when you know that, then I don't have to settle.
That's
Like,
right.
because I know that, I don't have to settle for abuse. I
Right.
don't have to settle being in that toxic relationship. I don't have to, even if you're not married, if you're listening and you're in a relationship, right? If you're just in a boyfriend girlfriend relationship, having that understanding that like you said, what does God, my father, want for me? And if God is king and I'm a princess, why am I settling for less, than what I deserve? I think what you said is so important, that sometimes we condemn ourselves, like we hold ourselves, we don't forgive ourselves first for whatever we have done, and then let those things go, right? And
That's
then
right.
look to God to fulfill all the promises that he's made, because God is not like man. Like whatever he promised, the best, then
Yes.
he's going to be faithful to perform that. We don't have to say, well, I'm just going to settle for this over here because this is all that I think I deserve based on whatever I did a long time ago. How how do you how would you tell someone how to let go of maybe the shame, because I think me and you talked about that when we talked over the phone about kind of getting over the shame, right? You had shame from having a baby out of wedlock. You carried that shame. You were in this marriage. It was an abusive marriage. Even though you both were in the church, you both were serving in the church, you still had that shame, living that double life. Like, how would you tell someone to, how do you let go of that to realize that God has something better for me?
Just by spending time with God and looking up. Instead of holding your head down in shame, you're looking up, looking at God, looking at all that He says that you are in His Word.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's all I got to say about that. Just looking at what He says about you instead of what you feel about yourself.
Yeah. You talked a lot about forgiveness and the fact that you had to forgive yourself, right? You had to forgive yourself for the mistakes you made. You had to forgive and let go of the self-condemnation. How did you get to the point, because we talked about this, how did you get to the point where you could forgive him, for, the abuse that you suffered? What did that process look like for you?
Do you know, Kia, that was the easiest part, was to forgive him. The
Wow.
harder part was to forgive myself. Because
Wow.
when he said he was sorry, I forgave him and went on. Because when somebody asks you to forgive and say that they're sorry, that's what you were supposed to do. As a Christian, that's what you're supposed to do. 7 days times 7, right?
Right.
The hardest part was to forgive myself.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting, because for most people it's it's the other way around,
Yeah,
where
when
it's
you living in that, and you holding on to the hope that things will get better, and then you're seeing the good times, and then in the midst of the bad times, you just want more of that, and so
mm,
you forgive because you want more of that. I gotta let what happened yesterday go because I want more of this, and so you
wow.
just forgive and you go on.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it was your hope. Is that what I'm
Yes.
hearing? It was the hope that he's going to change, right?
Yes.
Like, the times where he's not being a monster, like, I'm just holding on to, maybe he's
Yes.
going to continue to be that person and let go of the other stuff. The hope was what allowed you to forgive while
That's
you were in that process of doing that. Yeah.
right. That's right.
You mentioned earlier about, I think the pastor that you were at that time, he talked a lot about setting boundaries.
That's right.
And can you talk a little bit about the importance, if we have women that are listening, the importance of having those healthy boundaries and setting those boundaries, in your relationships?
Oh, yeah. You have to set boundaries. If you don't set a boundary, people are going to always overstep and invade your space and hurt you. So
Mhm.
so after you after you have been hurt over and over and over again, somewhere you got to draw the line
Right.
so that you can live. And
Mhm.
so you don't want to just never say, just allow the same things to happen over and over and over again. and
Right.
and I did not learn that until till close to the end of our marriage, that you set the boundaries, and if they stop, you can set it for your kids. Hey, don't you do that anymore, or I'm gonna
Mhm.
get you. You can set it for the kids.
Mhm.
How come you can't set it for yourself?
Wow.
So
Right.
setting that firm line and actually standing by it. If you ever do this again, it took me a long time to be able to say that. I
Wow.
had to be fed the word and read the word to know that I had power to say, if you ever do that again, it's over.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Wow. You said it earlier that it's important. Your relationship with God is what gave you that strength, right?
Mhm.
To survive, to overcome, to endure everything you went through. I mean, 12 years is a long time to be in a relationship that is somewhat of a seesaw, like you're good and then
Exactly
it's
what it was.
good and then it's not good, and having those times, I would assume that, you're kind of like what you said earlier. Okay, is something going to be said that's going to trigger? Like you said, it was so minor. Like I can't even remember, what the thing was that set the person off. What a way to live in that instability and to be able to lean on and have your relationship with God, which is what sustained you and allowed you to have the strength that you needed, not just for yourself, but also for your kids too, as well. And to start your life over again. And I'm sure that process was not easy, starting your life over again to now being in a healthy, purposeful relationship that you've been in for 22 years. That's, you can't say anything except that had to be God, and it had to be God's grace. What, as we close, what would be your, I guess, what would be your words of wisdom or your takeaway? What would you say to someone who has gone through a divorce and is feeling like, this is the end, or not feeling worthy, or not feeling, like they deserve better or deserve more? Like you said, your story is not just about surviving, but it is about overcoming, and it speaks truth to the fact, and I've said it in other episodes, that violence, abuse, it doesn't discriminate, and we see so many people, especially, in the church. You've grown up in the church, I've grown up in the church, and we see people and they look great, right? You said that earlier. They look good on the outside. They look like, oh, they've been married 30 years, 40 years, 20 years, and they have this great relationship, but you don't really know what goes on behind closed doors. And there are people that are suffering, or in marriages where they don't feel love, where they feel worthless, when they are experiencing some sort of abuse or manipulation or control. I guess, what would you say to those individuals? And then what would you say to individuals who have gone through the divorce process and are now trying to like rebuild their life?
One thing I do want to point out that, and a chapter in my new book is called Living in Isolation. And that's a lot of us who go through abuse, we live in isolation. I was physically in isolation, living in South Dakota, away from family, away from friends. We didn't know anybody. We were brand new there, and I was isolated. And so I was living in isolation. And even if
Wow.
you have, when you're going through abuse, you are alone. You don't want anybody to know. You don't tell anybody. So you can't be real with anybody. You're just alone within yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
so because I was alone, I didn't talk to anybody, didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell my parents. My daddy just thought that only that incident with my brother was the only incident. He never knew.
Wow.
I was alone physically, I was alone emotionally, disconnected to people. And so the only person I could be real with was God. That was the
Mm,
only I could write. I could write and I could write. And God knew what I was going through. God knows what we suffer. Even
mm,
if don't nobody else know, God knows and He sees it all. And I can just imagine him saying, my daughter, you don't have to go through this. You don't have to go through this.
right.
You don't have to go through this.
Mm-hmm.
You are my daughter. And I think about if my daddy knew that all the things that I went through, he would have got his hunting rifle and he would have came in and he would have got
Right.
that. And that's a natural daddy. And I think
Right.
I think anybody's daddy, for when he knows that his daughter is going through something like that, he's going to go get that man. Woe be to that man. Well, you think
Right.
about God. God is just, God is almighty. God wants the best for us, and He does not want us to go through things like that. And if we stay in that, we stay in there because We don't have the confidence to believe that God can
Mm,
be with us even when we come out.
right.
That's the thing is we afraid that we're afraid of the other side. If in this, my kids have a father. We have finances. We have a place to stay. The scary part is on the other side when that is gone.
Right.
When
Right.
I left, I didn't have a place to stay. I had one income. I had 4 kids. That's the scary part. That
Right.
was scarier than living with the abuse. And so when you look at when you realize that God is with me,
Hmm.
God will be with me. And when you see that God will be with you, that gives you the courage. Hey, my daddy, it's ironic. My natural daddy moved in with me, and
Hmm.
he helped me raise my kids. My heavenly Father was with me, even on
Right.
the other side of divorce. And so, no matter what you're going through, no matter what you're going through, when you just decide that you're gonna let God be your daddy, He's
Hmm.
gonna be with you all the way. And with God, all things are possible. I came out, I overcame, and I'm doing good. I'm
Hmm.
blessed. I'm so blessed. And God, I was the same daughter when I was living
Yeah.
in that first moment. I'm the same daughter, except now I see God as my daddy. I'm the
Hmm.
same person, but I see
Hmm.
God differently. And, and
Hmm.
and that makes all the difference. How do you see God? Are you gonna let God be your daddy? Are you gonna
Hmm.
let God take care of you on the other side? Come out
Right.
on the other side. Let your daddy take care of you. There are many support systems that are in place now. If things are not like they were 20 some years ago,
Right.
a long time. There are so many support systems that we do not have to. I didn't know about shelters and all of that when I left the first time, and I'm sure they
Right.
existed. I'm on the board of
Right.
directors of one now that I didn't even know about then, and it was back then they were still open, but we didn't know
Right.
about that, and people didn't talk about it, and so
Hmm.
it's scary. But
Yeah.
now it's even less scarier because of all the support. I could have left and had a whole new identity now
Right.
with the things that they do for you now. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
I hope I answered
Wow.
your question.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. I'm just so definitely grateful and thankful for you coming on today to tonight to share your story and all transparency of going through that. And like you said, not just about you being a survivor, but you being an overcomer. And as hard as it was, the journey that you had to go through to get rid of the shame, to get rid of the self condemnation, to get rid of the guilt, and to forgive yourself, and to allow God to be who He wants to be in your life, which is your Father, and to take care of you. That's such a powerful, you know, thing to come to the knowledge of knowing that even if you had to make a hard decision, which going through a divorce is a hard decision, that if you have God in your life, you're not going through that situation by yourself.
That's
And you
right.
have someone who is going to take care of you. You have someone who is going to be there with you. And that his promises to you are still there and they remain
That's
true.
right.
It doesn't matter. Like, you getting a divorce doesn't negate the promises of God
That's
that he
right.
already
That's
had
right.
over your life.
That's the amen to that. That's
Right.
right.
Yes. 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 So yes, again, thank you so much. I'm just am overjoyed, and just your story has really blessed me personally.
Amen.
And
Yes.
so I'm thankful for everyone who has come out this evening. If you logged in to listen, if you know someone who needs to hear this, please share, tag, send it to them. Again, thank you, Dr. Hargraves, for coming on. You
Thank
guys
you for
can
having me.
Yes, you guys can Google. Do you have a copy of your book? You can put it up. They can see it.
I have this one.
Mhm.
And the
Yeah.
next one coming up is called Touch Not.
Yes,
Touch
yes, yes.
Not.
So, yes, she has written her first book already,
Uh-huh.
journaling and chronicling her stories through abuse, and she's finished her second book, and hopefully that will be out shortly. But again, I just want to thank everyone for coming on. Just if you didn't hear anything else tonight, just understanding and knowing that there is hope, right? And even if you feel fearful in the decision that you have to make, that if you have God with you, He is able to walk with you through that journey. And getting divorced is not the end, it's not the
That's right.
stigma. You don't have to live with that shame or that stigma. There is hope, there is love, there is purpose on the other side. Thank you guys so much for watching. Until the next time, I really appreciate you.
Amen. Thank you, Kia.